Hello guys, I'm Dr. Kashan Kasit again with my new video of the topic that is transport through the cell membrane. Transport through the cell membrane occurs via two mechanisms, that is passive transport and the active transport. What is passive transport? Passive transport is the movement of molecules from a higher gradient to the lower gradient. It is movement of molecules from a concentration of higher gradient to the lower one. So it is a downhill movement like this. It is moving molecules from a higher positions or a higher level energy to the lower one. So there will be no need of energy in this process. It is also known as diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of substances from a higher concentration to the lower concentration. So there are two types of the diffusions, that is simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion is further classified into simple diffusion through the lipid layer. As we have studied that a lipid layer is like this, head with a tail. We have studied this earlier. So this simple diffusion through the lipid membrane occurs without any aid of a carrier molecule or a carrier transporter. So this is lipid layer, so the substances which are lipid soluble can pass through this membrane, like alcohol, carbon dioxide, etc. These will pass through the membrane through the process of simple diffusion. The second one is simple diffusion through the protein layer or protein molecules. There are the some of the molecules which do not diffuse through this membrane of the lipid, so it needs some carrier or a protein molecule to carry it from this portion to this portion. So protein carriers or protein molecules are present. There are pores in the membrane, in the cell membrane there are pores, and the integral proteins are present in these pores. So integral membranes proteins are the proteins which are transversing throughout the membrane from one side to the other one. So these protein molecules are carrying the substances from the ECF to the ICF, or in different processes it is involved in carrying substances. Likewise, there are protein channels which are carrying the substances, like voltage gated channels, ligand gated channels, mechanically gated channels. All these channels are named accordingly, like voltage gated channels which are present in the neurons or neuromuscular junctions, where the chemical gradient changes and calcium ions are released into the cell, and so ECF, and then the process begins. So likewise, ligand gated channels, we have discussed it earlier in the apoptosis. The third one is mechanically gated channels. These are working by factors, mechanical factors like a pressure. We'll take here the example of a pressure. Whenever there will be the change in the pressure or applied pressure to the area in our body, there are pressure receptors that are Pacinian corpuscles. These will carry the messages. Receptors on the membrane. In the cell membrane there are ligand receptors, that is DR4 and 5, which will carry the load. The next one, this one is the simple diffusion. So the next one is the facilitated diffusion or carrier diffusion. It is occurring through some carrier proteins. When these carrier proteins, like this one is the protein channel in the cell membrane. This protein channel will change when, like we'll take here the example of glucose. These are glucose molecules, and when these glucose molecules come in contact with these channels, there will be the conformational change, and this will change. Here is the glucose molecule. This will change its position and closes from this point, and the glucose molecule will transfer through this membrane to the other side of the membrane. So amino acids or glucose molecules, these are transported through the special protein carriers like this one are facilitated through the carriers, so we called it a facilitated diffusion. So we were discussing the mechanism of transport of the substances across the cell membrane. So we have done with the topic that is facilitated diffusion and other types of diffusion. We have discussed all these type of diffusions. Now here is the active transport. Active transport is just opposite to that of the diffusion, because it needs energy. It requires energy in the form of ATP for its process. So it is the movement of substances against the concentration gradient, while in facilitated diffusion there is no such a process that is against the concentration gradient. The second one is the uphill movement. It is not like the movement from the top to the bottom that do not require any energy. So it is against the concentration gradient, that is moving from this lower portion of a hill to the upward, this top of the hill. So it is called uphill transport or uphill movement of the molecules. So what are the different carrier proteins of the active transports? In facilitated diffusion, there is a diffusion through the lipid membrane, also through some of the proteins and carriers. So here is the carrier proteins for the active transport. So there are two types of the carrier proteins. Number one is the unipod and the second one is the sympod or antipod. Unipod means, uni means one, so it only transport only one substance. These proteins carry only one substance, only single direction, one direction. So that's why it is called unipod. The second one is the sympod or antipod. In a sympod, whenever the two substances are transported or carried at the same time in the same direction, two substances, number one, the second one, two substances when they are traveling in the same direction, so it is sympod. The second one is when two different substances are carried to the opposite direction, then it will be the antipod. Antipod and the sympod mechanism. So this is all about the active transport and the carrier proteins, which is carrying the substances across the membrane.